My name is Shamal Porter, and on the night of October 9th, 2022, I died. There's no poetic way to wrap that up, no sugarcoating, no gentle way to unwrap a truth that sharp. It happened quietly, under a cluster of trembling maple trees in a city park most people in Richmond, Virginia forget exists. The same park where I used to laugh as a child, where my dad once brought me ice cream after a dentist appointment. It had become my escape, the only place I could think in the middle of a life that no longer made sense. Before I go further, I need you to understand something. I didn't die in a fiery crash or from a random heart attack. I died by my own hand. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't an act of rage or some last-minute emotional outburst. It was planned, thought out, considered. I was deliberate, calm. I was ready to go, or at least I believed I was. I had been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease when I was 23. Doctors didn't have much to offer me beyond terms like rare, progressive, and pain management. At first, I tried to stay optimistic. I told myself it would pass. I was still so young. I had plans, nursing school, maybe someday working with children, maybe one day having my own. But slowly, one after another, those dreams peeled off like dried leaves. My body betrayed me in ways I wasn't prepared for. I couldn't walk without pain. I couldn't eat without discomfort. I lost weight, lost my job. Friends stopped texting. My ex stopped caring. Eventually, I stopped leaving the house altogether. I felt like I was decaying in real time. I had no energy to fight anymore. But worse than the pain was the shame. The kind that sinks so deep it wraps around your soul. I felt useless, a burden to my parents, especially my mother who had already sacrificed so much. I'd sit in bed at night staring at the ceiling, wishing I could disappear without hurting anyone. I didn't want to suffer anymore, and I didn't want them to suffer because of me. That's how I came to be in Bird Park that night, wearing my favorite hoodie, pockets filled with painkillers I had quietly hoarded over months. The air was cold, the grass wet with evening dew. A gentle mist rolled off the water, and for a moment, everything looked still. I sat on the same bench I had visited every week as a child, the same one where my father used to tell me silly stories about ducks being secret agents. I whispered a prayer, maybe my first real one in years, not asking for salvation, just hoping God, if he existed, would understand. Then I took the pills. I thought that would be the end. Instead, it was the beginning of something that shattered every lie I had ever believed about life, death, and the world beyond. At first, there was nothing. No pain, no sound, no light, just stillness. Then came the sensation of being pulled, like something had hooked into the deepest part of me and yanked me loose. I remember floating, detached from my body, watching it slump forward on the bench like a puppet whose strings had been cut. I didn't feel sadness. I felt released. But the peace was short-lived. Around me, everything changed. The park dissolved into a pale gray mist. The ground disappeared, and I was suspended in a space that defied understanding, like floating in a colorless fog. I saw others, faint shadows drifting around me. Some wept, some screamed. Others stared ahead blankly, pulled in the same direction I was being drawn toward. There were no stars, no moon, no warmth, only the overwhelming feeling that something terrible was ahead. I tried to speak, tried to move, but there was no body, no voice, just presence, and something else, a low, haunting sound in the distance. It wasn't music, not quite, more like groaning, mourning, the sound of souls in agony. I didn't know where I was, but something inside me began to panic. I tried to turn back, to flee, but the force pulling me forward grew stronger. I wasn't walking, but I was moving, fast, helplessly drawn toward a massive structure looming in the distance. As it came into view, my soul trembled. Black iron gates towered over a charred landscape, their twisted frames etched with faces, human faces. They moved, screamed, begged. Some whispered my name, my God. Then came the smell, sulfur and rot, and something I can only describe as spiritual decay, a stench that made my very soul recoil. I tried to shut my eyes, but there were no eyes to shut. Every sense was wide open, raw and defenseless. Demonic beings, shapes of smoke and rage, circled the gates, dragging souls through in chains. There was no fighting, no negotiations. The damned simply accepted their fate. I heard my name again, Shamal, but this time it came not from the gates, but from behind me. A voice, a presence, pure but distant. I cried out, inside myself, a scream from somewhere deeper than any breath could reach. But it was too late. The gates opened, and I was sucked in. Inside hell, there was no fire like I'd imagined. Not at first. Just darkness, pressing, suffocating, intelligent darkness. It was aware of me. It mocked me. And then came the heat. But it wasn't the heat of flames. It was the heat of despair, shame, and pain so thick it burned. I saw rivers, not of water, but molten grief coursing between hills of jagged rock. Souls crawled and stumbled, their bodies continually breaking and regenerating, only to break again. Screams echoed from every direction, but they weren't just cries of pain. They were confessions, apologies, regrets. And then I saw him, isolated on a scorched platform, illuminated by a single searing spotlight, was a man I had once adored as a child, Michael Jackson. At first, I thought it was some kind of trick, a hallucination. But as I drew nearer, I knew it was him. His face bore a hollow sadness, not the vibrant expressions I remembered from music videos. He looked weary, broken beyond comprehension, yet aware. So terribly aware. Chains bound him, not just around his wrists and ankles, but around his spirit. They weren't metal. They were memories, moments. Every lyric, every performance, every adoring scream now turned against him. The voices that once praised him now tormented him. He turned and looked at me. Not just looked, he saw me. "You don't belong here," he said. His voice, still recognizable but frayed, like a song on a dying radio. I made a deal. I wanted control, fame, the world. And I got it for a while. He raised his chained hands as if to shield himself from the endless spotlight. This is my reward. I wanted to reach out, to ask more, but the darkness began to pull me deeper. He saw it, and with desperation etched into every syllable, he cried out, "Don't make the same mistake." Then, just like that, he was gone. I was yanked away, hurtling back through the tunnel of despair, screaming without breath, feeling my soul unravel. The last thing I remember before waking was the voice again, the same one that called my name before the gates. It whispered, "Not yet." I awoke in the hospital, tubes in my throat, monitors screaming, nurses rushing, my mother sobbing beside the bed. I had been dead for over 11 minutes, and somehow I had returned. When I opened my eyes in the hospital, everything felt wrong. The overhead lights stabbed like daggers into my skull. I couldn't move. My tongue was dry, my chest ached with every breath, and I could hear someone sobbing beside me. I didn't know what was real, what had been real. My brain couldn't make sense of the tubes in my mouth, the needle in my arm, the steady beeping of machines reminding me that I had come back. The last thing I remember before the white light and the return to my body was Michael Jackson's voice echoing, "Don't make the same mistake." I drifted in and out of consciousness for a while, days maybe. I later learned they had called it a miraculous recovery, that after being found collapsed and not breathing in the park, my body had gone completely still. My heart had stopped. I had no pulse for over 11 minutes, and the only reason the EMTs didn't call the time of death was because one of them, Brian, his name was, refused to stop chest compressions. He said he felt something. I found out later he was a Christian. But while my family celebrated, I wasn't at peace. What I had seen on the other side haunted me more than death itself. My soul had walked through a truth that most people mock or ignore. And worst of all, I had almost stayed there. In the days that followed, as I lay in that sterile hospital room watching nurses chart my vitals, I kept silent. Not because I didn't remember. No, I remembered everything. The chains, the screams, the blackened gates, the twisted demons with smiles like knives, and Michael, that broken man who once moonwalked across stages, now begging me not to make the same mistake. But how could I explain that? Who would believe me? I was the girl who tried to end her life, a failed suicide in recovery. Anything I said would be chalked up to trauma, delusion, or medication. So I held it in, at least at first. It wasn't until my third night in recovery that the real shift began. I was alone in my room, the hallway dark, the soft buzz of machines the only sound. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear the screaming, souls wailing in the distance, begging for just one more chance. I kept seeing Michael's eyes, filled with sorrow that pierced through his torment. And then the room changed. Not physically, but spiritually. I felt something enter. Not a chill, but a presence, warm, dense, alive. I couldn't move, but I didn't need to. The atmosphere itself bent under the weight of what stepped in. I knew it instantly. The same voice that had called me by name outside hell. The one that said, "Not yet." Jesus. He didn't appear like a man, not in flesh. It was light, not burning or blinding, but total. It filled every corner of my room, yet it didn't cast a shadow. It felt like love, but also truth. Sharp, cleansing, terrifying truth. I wanted to hide, wanted to shrink. I began to sob, not from pain but from shame. My soul felt exposed, not just for the suicide, not just for giving up, but for the years I'd lived chasing validation in empty places, social media, shallow friendships, success. I had become my own idol without realizing it. And Jesus showed me. He didn't speak with lips, but his voice echoed in my soul. You believed you were alone, but I was with you every night you cried. I was with you in the pain, in the silence, even on the bench. I choked out the only words I could form in my mind. Then why didn't you stop me? The response wasn't anger. It was grief. Because I gave you a choice. I honor what I create, even when it runs from me. And then, slowly, he showed me pieces of my life from his eyes. Not the moments I remembered, but the ones I didn't think mattered. A time I gave a sandwich to a homeless man and told him God loved him. The time I sang to a special needs child on the bus, even when everyone else stared. The time I prayed for my mother under my breath, not even believing it would make a difference. Each moment flickered like a star, small but blazing in the darkness of despair. I had never thought of those acts as holy, but in his presence they glowed. Jesus didn't judge me as the broken girl who gave up. He showed me I had always been seen, always, and that the devil had lied to me over and over again. The enemy tempts with relief but offers only chains. I felt the weight of that sentence like fire. Hell was not merely punishment. It was the final form of a life lived apart from God. And I had almost chosen it, willingly. Jesus then showed me something that broke me entirely. A vision of my mother. The night I died, she was on her knees, clutching my childhood photo, weeping, begging God not to let me go. Not yet. That's when I realized her prayer is what pulled me back. Jesus let me see the ripple. That if I had succeeded and stayed dead, my mother would have lost her faith. My father would have returned to drinking. A young nurse who had once shadowed me in clinicals would have committed suicide a month later, following in my footsteps because she had looked up to me. And Marcus, I hadn't seen him since the accident. My best friend since high school. He hadn't known what I had planned. But in the vision, I saw him standing over my grave 5 years later, a bitter atheist, angry at a God who let good people die. You were meant to be light to them, Jesus whispered. And the light shines in darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. I broke. I cried like a child, not from fear anymore, but from love. I had a purpose, even in the pain, especially in the pain. Then, as his presence slowly faded, Jesus left me with one final charge. You must tell them what you saw, even if they mock you, even if they leave you. Tell them hell is real, but so is my mercy. And just like that, I was alone again, but not empty. The next day, I asked the nurse if I could speak to the hospital chaplain. I began to write down every single detail of my experience. The demons, the voices, the gates, Michael Jackson's sorrow, the chains made of memory, everything. I filled 5 notebooks in a week. My hands cramped. My eyes ached. But the story poured out like a dam breaking. The chaplain listened. At first, he was skeptical. But as I spoke, he cried. He told me he had lost his brother to suicide 2 months before. That he had prayed to God for a sign that his brother's soul had been received. I told him I wasn't shown his brother, but I was shown how deeply suicide wounds the soul and the world around it. I left the hospital 2 weeks later, but I wasn't the same woman. Not anymore. I was alive, And for the first time in years, I wanted to be. Leaving the hospital should have felt like freedom, like being born again, but it didn't. The moment I stepped outside and breathed in the crisp morning air, I expected to feel peace. Instead, I felt a weight I couldn't shake, like I was walking through two realities at once. People passed by me laughing, sipping coffee, scrolling their phones, and all I could think was, you don't know what's waiting. You don't know how real it is. I couldn't unsee what I saw in hell. For the first time, the word celebrity tasted bitter in my mouth. Every time I passed a magazine rack with Michael Jackson's face, or heard one of his songs playing on a speaker in the hospital lobby, my stomach turned. Not because I hated him. No, because I pitied him. He had been so loved, so praised, so worshipped, and now he was bound, spotlighted by mockery, chained in the very flames that he once danced through in metaphor. I remembered his voice so clearly, shaking, defeated. I sold my soul. Don't make the same mistake. I went home to my parents' house. They had refused to let me live alone. I was still on suicide watch, but I didn't need to be. That desire was dead, buried in the fire I had seen. I didn't want death. I wanted purpose. I wanted to obey the one voice that had called me back. But that's where the real suffering began. Not physical, but emotional, spiritual. I tried to tell people. I started gently at first, telling my mother about the light I saw. She smiled, hopeful. She was always the religious one. But when I told her about hell, about seeing Michael Jackson there, her expression shifted. She tried to hide it, but I saw it in her eyes, concern, fear, doubt. You were sedated, she said. You nearly died. Of course your mind conjured something dramatic. I nodded. Let it go. But inside, I knew it wasn't a hallucination. It had more clarity than anything I'd experienced in my waking life. So I tried again with Marcus, my closest friend. He had been one of the only people who stuck by me through the darkest seasons. I told him everything, every vivid detail. I even cried when I spoke about the souls being tortured, the flames that didn't burn flesh but hope, and about Michael's chilling regret. He stared at me for a long time and finally said, Shamal, this sounds like religious trauma. You were hurting, and your brain created punishment. He patted my hand and gave a weak smile. You don't have to scare yourself into being okay. It broke me. I had touched something so sacred, so terrifyingly real, and the people I loved most dismissed it. I began to wonder if Jesus had made a mistake sending me back. Who was I to tell the world about hell? Who would believe a failed suicide? A woman who couldn't handle life? That's when the nightmare started. Every night, I'd dream of the road again, the one filled with drifting spirits. I'd hear the same voices calling out in despair. But it wasn't just them anymore. It was people I knew, friends, family, strangers on the bus. Their voices cried out to me by name. Why didn't you warn me? I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a drum. I knew I couldn't stay silent, so I started small. I found an online forum for near-death experiences and anonymously posted my story. To my surprise, people responded, not just with curiosity, but with pain. Messages from people contemplating suicide, from Christians who were wrestling with sin they didn't think was that bad, from people who had left the faith, thinking it was too judgmental, too old-fashioned. I read every message, prayed over every name. I couldn't offer perfect theology or polished sermons, but I could offer truth. The truth of what I saw, of what I felt, and slowly something beautiful began to happen. A girl named Mariah messaged me privately, said she'd been thinking about ending her life. She read my post, cried for hours, and then went to her grandmother's church the next day. A man named Tarek wrote, saying he had once idolized Michael Jackson and felt crushed by my testimony, but after praying for discernment, he felt peace and conviction for the first time in years. I started getting more messages, not thousands, but dozens, then hundreds. And with every testimony, I understood why Jesus had said, "Tell them, even if they leave you." I had been sent back not to be famous, not to be a preacher, not to be some TikTok trend, but to warn, to remind people that death is not the end, and that hell is not a metaphor. But I wasn't ready for what came next. About 6 weeks after posting my story online, a documentary YouTuber reached out, said he had found my post and wanted to interview me. He had interviewed dozens of NDE survivors, but said mine felt different. I hesitated. I didn't want fame. I didn't want trolls or hate. But I prayed, and the answer was clear: be obedient. So I said yes. We filmed the interview in my living room. No makeup, no glamour, just truth. I told him everything, start to finish. And when the video went live, it exploded. Thousands of views turned to hundreds of thousands, then 1 million. The comment section was a war zone, some mocking, some worshipful, some heartbroken. But in the chaos, one thing became clear: the message was spreading. And that's when I knew I wasn't alone anymore. The interview had barely been online for a week when my email inbox was flooded. At first, I tried to read every message, every comment, every desperate cry for truth or assurance. I wasn't prepared for the weight of their words. People from every continent, believers, atheists, skeptics, addicts, broken mothers, angry ex-Christians, were pouring out their hearts to a woman who had once tried to end her life under the cover of a dying park sky. But the most haunting messages came from the ones who confessed what I had once felt, that suicide was the only escape left. They'd write things like, "Your words felt like a rope pulling me out of a pit," or, "I was about to end it all, but I saw your face, and something told me to wait." Every time I read one, I wept. I had no special knowledge, no counseling license, no perfect doctrine. But I had seen, I had heard, and I had come back. Maybe that was enough. But I couldn't pretend the storm wasn't growing. The more the story spread, the more backlash I received. Christian influencers accused me of using hell for clicks. Others called me mentally unstable or accused me of making it up for attention. One particularly venomous article said I was slandering Michael Jackson's legacy to push religious extremism. It hurt, not because they didn't believe me, but because they didn't want to. It's easier to keep hell in a theological box than to believe it burns beneath the feet of the deceived. Easier to idolize the talents of a fallen man than to face the reality that even icons can fall hard. And Michael, I couldn't stop thinking about him. His face haunted me in the quiet moments, the deep ache in his eyes, the endless spotlight burning his soul. I knew he wasn't in that torment because he was a celebrity. It wasn't about fame. It was about surrender, or the lack of it. He had been gifted extraordinarily, but had traded the giver for glory. And as crazy as it sounds, I felt love for him, not admiration, not obsession. Love, a broken, grieving love, the kind you feel when you see a child lost in a fire they lit themselves. I prayed for him, even though I knew his fate was sealed. Maybe that prayer wasn't for him, but for everyone still dancing in his footsteps. I started speaking at churches, reluctantly at first. Youth groups, women's ministries, mental health panels. People were both captivated and shaken. I could see it in their eyes, the tension between wonder and terror. They were drawn to my experience, but repelled by its implications. One young girl, no more than 15, came up to me after a talk. Her eyes were red, her voice shaking. "Miss Shamel," she said, "do you think if Michael Jackson had repented before he died, Jesus would have saved him?" I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Tears spilled from her eyes. She whispered, "I want to repent too. I've been playing with things I know aren't right. Tarot, crystals, stuff like that. But I always thought I had time." I hugged her. "You have time, but don't waste it." It was moments like that when I remembered why Jesus had sent me back. Not to shock people, to save them. But even as my platform grew, I struggled with survivor's guilt. Why had I been pulled out while others remained? Why was I still breathing, able to feel joy again, while Michael's voice echoed in screams I couldn't silence? I sought refuge in prayer, in fasting, in long walks with no headphones, letting the wind remind me I was alive. I stopped asking why and started asking how. How could I reach more people? How could I live every day in obedience? And that's when the dreams returned. They weren't nightmares, not quite. They were warnings. I'd see faces in the dark, just out of reach. Hear songs I recognized, played backwards, warped and hollow. I'd hear laughter that turned into sobs. And always, always the same voice. "Tell them, before it's too late." Sometimes I'd wake up gasping, sometimes in tears, but always with a new urgency burning in my chest. I knew my story wasn't just a testimony, it was a trumpet blast, a last call message to a sleeping church and a distracted world. And then one night, something happened that I still can't fully explain. I was alone in my room, praying for a young woman who had just emailed me about ending her life. I cried out to God for her, begged him to send angels to her bedside. And then the air in the room changed. It felt thicker, heavier, but not oppressive. Holy. And in that stillness, I heard a whisper, not from within, but from beyond. "You were not spared for silence." It shook me. It broke me. I fell to my knees and sobbed, not because I was afraid, but because I knew I had been running from the full weight of the call. It wasn't enough to share my story when it was convenient. I had to live it, breathe it, let it cost me everything, if that's what it took. And so I said yes again. Yes to rejection. Yes to isolation. Yes to the burden of being the messenger no one wants to hear. Because if one soul turned back, if one person dropped the pills, deleted the idol, walked away from the fire, I'd do it all again. I don't know what I expected after that night. Maybe a sudden surge of supernatural strength or some holy blueprint written in fire. But instead, what followed was silence. Not the kind that empties a room, but the kind that tests the resolve of your heart. The silence of obedience when no one is clapping. No spotlight, no applause, just the echo of a vow between you and God. So I got to work. Not glamorous work, quiet, gritty, often unnoticed. I started hosting a weekly gathering in my living room. We called it Come Alive, a place where people could come, no matter how messy or broken, and encounter the presence of Jesus. It started with 4 people, a guy fresh out of rehab, a suicidal single mom, a former witch, and a timid church kid who had been kicked out for asking too many questions. We sat on mismatched furniture, shared stories, cried, and opened the Bible like it was the first time anyone had ever read it. Word spread. By the 3rd month, we had over 20 people packed into my tiny apartment. We prayed, worshipped, repented, delivered each other through intercession and trembling tears. One girl collapsed under the weight of demonic oppression and was set free through prayer. A teenage boy brought his friends, and by the end of the night, they were burning occult books in my kitchen sink. I still remember the smell. I began to see what the enemy feared most, light in the hands of the formerly hopeless. Still, the visions didn't stop. They came in flashes, on the bus, while washing dishes, in the middle of a movie. I'd see celebrities, some alive, some dead, standing at the edge of a cliff, smiling into cameras while their feet crumbled beneath them. The world clapped, but I could hear demons whispering behind them. Sing for us, dance for us, distract them while we destroy them. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the living, but then the dream came. I was back at the gates of hell. The same twisted, metallic architecture, screaming faces frozen in the gate. Only this time, I wasn't standing outside. I was inside, walking through the torment as if guided, though I never saw who led me. The first soul I saw was a man bound in what looked like wires made of musical notes. He was weeping as the same song looped endlessly, now distorted, now mocking. I knew it was his song. I knew it had made millions of people dance on earth, and now it made him scream. I turned, and there he was again. Michael! Still chained, still burning beneath the spotlight. But this time, he looked at me, fully, with eyes that seemed to plead. Why are they still idolizing me? He whispered. Why do they still dress like me, sing like me when I'm here? I tried to warn them. I tried to leave, but the machine wouldn't let me. I stood frozen. He looked around at the endless torment. The echoes of fame turned funeral dirges. Then he said something I will never forget. Tell them I was loved. I was gifted, but I wasn't surrendered. Then a flash, brighter than lightning, and I was awake, heart pounding, soaked in sweat. I fell to my knees, trembling. The next morning, I deleted every secular artist from my playlists. I canceled a ticket to a concert I had been excited for. Not because music is evil, but because I finally understood the spirit behind some of it. Not every song is written in the key of heaven. And from then on, I preached differently. I began to speak not just of suicide, but of deception, of how the enemy hides behind fame, influence, false light. I showed teens how idols aren't just golden calves, they're Instagram pages, Spotify playlists, YouTube subscriptions. Anything you love more than truth. Anything you defend more than the gospel. People started getting uncomfortable. Attendance at Come Alive thinned. Some called me legalistic. One woman even said I was disrespecting the legacy of an icon. But I didn't flinch, because I had seen what legacy looked like in hell. And then, something strange happened. I got a message from a producer in Los Angeles. He'd seen one of my interviews online and wanted to turn my story into a film. Think heaven is for real, but with an edge, he said. I hesitated. He offered money, more than I'd ever seen. Promised creative control. But my spirit churned. So I asked, will I be able to include everything? Even the part about Michael? Silence. Then he laughed uncomfortably. We might have to tone that down for legal reasons. We don't want to offend fans. I hung up. I didn't need a film deal. I needed a faithful witness. That's when I knew this battle wasn't just personal. It was prophetic, and I was being asked once again to choose between comfort and calling. So I went back to the living room, back to the broken ones, back to prayer and fasting and preaching repentance like it still mattered. One night, during a service, a teenage girl came up to me trembling. She said she had a dream of hell and had seen Michael, just like I did. She had never heard my story, never watched the video, but she described the spotlight, the chains, the platform, everything. She sobbed. I used to dance like him every day. I used to pray to be like him. I hugged her tight and whispered, God wants you to be like Jesus, not Michael, not anyone else. That night, I realized the baton was being passed. The next generation was waking up. But would they stay awake? It's been 3 years since I died. 3 years since I saw the flames of hell lick the edge of my soul and heard the tortured whisper of a pop icon who once ruled the world. And in those 3 years, I've learned that spiritual awakening doesn't come with fanfare. It comes with fire, not a fire you dance in, but a fire you endure. A fire that burns away pretense, purges pride, and leaves you standing, raw, real, and reborn. Not many people want that kind of fire. They want inspiration, not conviction. They want Jesus as a life coach, not a Lord. They want miracles without repentance, blessings without brokenness. But the truth, the kind I saw firsthand, that truth isn't marketable. It's not sanitized. It's not safe. And that's exactly why it's real. After that teenage girl's dream confirmed mine, we spent an entire night in prayer, me, her, and 2 others. We prayed until dawn broke across the cracked blinds of my living room. She renounced every idol, every false identity, every counterfeit source of affirmation she had clung to. And then she smiled, not a performative, selfie smile, but the smile of someone finally free. That's when I knew God wasn't just healing the wounded. He was raising up warriors. Since then, I've been traveling more. Small towns, storefront churches, school gyms, anywhere I'm invited. I preach like it's my last breath, like hell is still real and heaven is still worth fighting for. Because it is. But it hasn't been easy. I've received death threats. LGBTQ activists have targeted me online, accusing me of hate, distortion, and exploiting trauma. Some former friends won't speak to me. I've been called a liar, a sellout, a fanatic. Let them talk. I stood in hell. I don't fear hashtags. And still, every week, I get private messages. Teens who are about to take their life. Women trapped in abusive relationships. Men secretly addicted to porn and ashamed to speak. People who grew up in church but never met Jesus. They write to say, I saw your video. I had a dream too. I think I saw what you saw. They're waking up. Not all of them, but enough. Enough to spark a remnant. I believe we're entering an hour where fame will be exposed for what it truly is. A stage lit by flames, applauded by demons, and abandoned the moment the curtain falls. And those who keep idolizing celebrities, whether musicians, influencers, even pastors, are in danger of walking the same road I did, only to learn too late that the applause of men cannot drown out the judgment of God. This generation is hungry for truth, but they don't know it yet. They scroll, binge, scroll again, numbing themselves with content while their souls cry out for something eternal. We have to give it to them, not another trend, not another self-help sermon, but Jesus, the real Jesus, the one who confronts as much as he comforts, the one who flips tables, breaks chains, and walks into hell itself to rescue a soul like mine. If he did it for me, he'll do it for you. But don't wait until you're staring into the pit. Don't wait until your idols crumble under the weight of your worship. Don't wait until you're chained in regret, whispering warnings to the next soul that passes by. Come now. Surrender now. Tear down the false altars you've built. Burn every lie you believed was your truth. Let Jesus, not fame, not fear, not influencers, be the one who defines you. Because in the end, the only light that matters is the one that cannot be imitated. So, if you're still reading, still listening, still wondering what to do next, here's your moment. Go to the comments section and write the one truth you're ready to admit. Maybe it's a secret sin. Maybe it's a fear. Maybe it's the name of someone you need to forgive. Or maybe it's just your first yes to Jesus. Whatever it is, type it out. Confession breaks chains. Transparency builds revival. Your comment might be the permission someone else needs to finally cry out for help. You don't need a stage to be heard. You just need honesty. I died. I saw hell. I met a soul everyone thought was untouchable. And I came back to tell you this. You are not too far gone. You are not alone. You are not unloved. Now it's your turn. What are you still holding on to? Let it go in the comments below. Revival starts there.